It was just a regular summer night in 1977, humid, uneventful, silent, until something extraordinary interrupted the quiet. A single, powerful radio signal from deep space hit the Earth's largest radio telescope. It lasted only 72 seconds. No one knew what it meant, where it came from, or why it never happened again. But what the signal suggested sent chills down the spines of scientists and skywatchers alike. We might not be alone. To this day, it's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in human history. And tonight, we're diving straight into the heart of it. Welcome to the story of the WOW signal, an event that might just be our first and only confirmed contact with intelligent life beyond Earth. Before you even think about clicking away, trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Because this isn't just another alien theory or some internet rabbit hole. This story might actually hold the answer to the biggest question humanity has ever asked. Are we alone in the universe? If you're someone who stares up at the stars and feels something stir inside you, a sense of wonder, curiosity, maybe even a bit of fear, then this video is for you. I'm not here to throw random facts at you or lecture like a science textbook. I want to take you on a journey that will mess with your head, pull at your emotions, and challenge what you think you know about reality. You came here because something deep inside of you wants answers, right? You saw the title and thought, could this really be it? A message from aliens. Stick with me because not only are you going to learn what happened, who discovered it, and what scientists believe now, you're going to walk away with the answer to the question that pulled you into this video in the first place. That's not a tease. That's a promise. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that eerie pull when looking up at the night sky? That weird sensation that someone or something might be looking back? You're not alone. Millions of people across the world, especially here in the United States, have felt that exact same thing. And guess what? That collective curiosity isn't just fantasy anymore. It's backed by a chilling radio transmission picked up by one of the most advanced radio telescopes we had at the time. The moment the signal hit, it broke all expectations. There were no satellites in the area, no known celestial events, no technical glitches. It came from somewhere out in the constellation Sagittarius, a place with no known stars or planets capable of sending such a powerful, narrow-bandwidth signal. In a world where TikTok theories and UFO sightings trend daily, this one stands apart. It was real. It was recorded. And to this day, it defies all logic. I want you to imagine being Jerry R. Emin, the astronomer who first spotted the signal. It's August 15th, 1977. He's sitting in a small lab at Ohio State University, surrounded by stacks of data printouts from the Big Ear radio telescope. It's monotonous work, row after row of alphanumeric code representing background noise from deep space. But then, something jumps out. A sudden burst of characters. 6EQUJ5. He circles it in red ink, scribbles "WOW" in the margin, and unknowingly births a legend.
Just take a second to appreciate that.
In a time long before iPhones, GPS, or Wi-Fi, this man captured what might have been a message from another world on a piece of paper. No recording, no replay, just raw data. And ever since that day, no one, not NASA, not SETI, not the brightest minds in the world, has been able to replicate or explain that signal. Now, let's pause for a second and talk about why this matters to you. Whether you're here because you're obsessed with alien contact, or because you're just curious about trending stories that blow up on YouTube and Reddit, this story is different. This isn't some blurry UFO footage or conspiracy theory. This is grounded in hard science. In fact, scientists have spent decades analyzing that signal, trying to debunk it, trying to explain it away. But every theory seems to fall apart under scrutiny. Was it a reflection off a satellite?
No.
A military transmission? Not likely. A glitch? Doesn't add up. And here's where it gets really freaky. The frequency the signal came through on? 1,420 megahertz. That's the natural frequency of hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. And guess what? That frequency is internationally protected. It's off limits. No one on Earth is allowed to use it for communications because scientists believe that if aliens were to send a message, they'd use hydrogen as their cosmic language. That's how deep this rabbit hole goes. But what if I told you the wow signal might not have been random? What if there was a bigger plan, a larger message, and we've just been missing the clues all along? In this video, we'll trace the path from that Ohio lab in 1977 to modern AI-assisted analysis in 2025. We'll look into why the government quietly changed their tone about extraterrestrials, why NASA launched new missions in the same direction as the WOW signal, and why former Pentagon insiders are now talking publicly about what they once dismissed as impossible. We'll explore how the rise of recent UAP footage, NASA's new exoplanet data, and declassified government documents all point back to one singular truth, that the WOW signal might not have been a fluke. It might have been a test, a ping, a message, or a warning. I want you to feel the weight of this. This isn't just science fiction. This is science reality, wrapped in mystery, drenched in the possibility that our planet was once, maybe even still is, being watched. The question isn't just, what was the WOW signal anymore? The question is, what happens if it happens again? What if this was only the beginning of a series of interstellar attempts to make contact? What if the signal was part of a pattern, one that we've only just started to notice? And what if, buried in old data logs or new AI algorithms, there's a second signal already waiting to be uncovered? Look, I know your time is valuable. There's no shortage of flashy videos and viral shorts competing for your attention. But if you've made it this far, that means you're different. You want more than just a quick answer. You want depth. You want truth. And you're ready to explore the unexplainable with an open mind. That's exactly what I've built this story to do. This isn't just about what happened. It's about why it happened, why it still matters, and why it might be happening again. By the time we're done, you won't just be informed, you'll be changed. Because this story isn't just about aliens. It's about us. About how we define ourselves in the vastness of the cosmos. About whether we're truly ready to hear a message from beyond the stars, and what we do with it if we are. And just when you think this mystery couldn't get any deeper, darker, or more unnerving, there's one more twist you need to know about. Recently, a group of independent researchers reanalyzed the WOW signal using advanced neural networks trained on cosmic noise. What they found sent shockwaves through the SETI community. They believe there might have been a faint secondary signal. Not as loud, not as clear, but undeniably present and eerily similar. Only this time, it didn't come from Sagittarius. It came from the opposite side of the sky, like an echo, like a reply, or maybe like something surrounding us, watching, waiting. So don't go anywhere, because in the next chapter, we'll examine that second signal, break down the decoded data, and show you exactly why some scientists are quietly freaking out. Forget the UFO sightings. Forget the grainy videos. This is the moment the world should have been talking about. And yet, no one is. Until now. So buckle up. Because what you're about to hear will change how you look at the stars forever. For decades after that quiet summer evening in 1977, Jerry Emmon remained both haunted and fascinated by the single moment that defined his career. Though the world quickly turned the WOW signal into a piece of speculative trivia, fodder for sci-fi documentaries, late-night AM radio hosts, and conspiracy forums, Jerry never moved on. He became consumed, not just by the signal itself, but by the strange circumstances that seemed to follow it. Friends noticed a change in him. Once sociable and optimistic, he grew withdrawn, obsessed with tracking anomalies in radio frequencies. He stopped teaching full-time, pulled away from colleagues, and poured hours into analyzing outdated telemetry tapes from the now-defunct Big Ear telescope. But it wasn't just the signal that pulled him deeper, it was something he never shared publicly. Something that happened a few weeks after he first wrote that iconic "wow" in red pen. According to a close friend and former colleague, Jerry received an unmarked envelope mailed to his home address. Inside was a blurry black and white photograph of the Big Ear telescope, taken at night from a low angle, as if someone was watching him work. On the back, scribbled in jagged handwriting, was a single phrase: "You weren't supposed to see that." He never told the media. He never reported it to the police. But those closest to him say that's when he started keeping two separate notebooks, one scientific and one private, locked away. Years later, when Jerry passed away, that second notebook mysteriously vanished. No one has been able to locate it. Not family. Not researchers. Not even those involved with SETI's official records. It's as if it never existed. And that's where the story begins to warp, not into fiction, but into something deeper, more disquieting. In recent years, new characters have entered the mystery, and each one brings with them more questions than answers. One of them is a former NSA contractor turned whistleblower who, after going off the grid, surfaced on encrypted forums claiming to have seen a file labeled Echo Traces, Unauthorized Frequency Origin, 1420 MHz, Dual Source, Compromised Analyst. Though he never named Jerry directly, those close to the case believe it's a reference to the WOW signal and the second faint transmission detected years later. But here's where it gets strange. No government agency has confirmed this file exists, and attempts to verify the contractor's identity have failed. His online alias? Deep Sky Alpha. The name itself has become viral in YouTube searches tied to topics like alien transmissions, declassified UAP files, and hidden NASA footage, yet no one truly knows who he is or what his real connection to the signal might be. Was he really inside the intelligence apparatus? Or is he a red herring, a planted distraction in an already tangled mystery? And while that shadowy figure fades in and out of obscure message boards, a more visible player has taken center stage. Meet Dr. Lena Armitage, an astrophysicist who has recently reignited public interest in the WOW signal through her viral TED Talk, titled "The Silence Between the Stars Might Not Be Silence at All." She's articulate, passionate, and, perhaps most importantly, not afraid to call out what she sees as institutional fear around the signal's implications. She claims to have obtained new data through NASA's TESS and James Webb Space Telescope programs, data that allegedly shows microbursts of non-random frequencies from the same region of Sagittarius, where the original signal originated. But when pressed by journalists to produce the raw files, she hesitates. Her reasoning? Ongoing verification and concerns for her own safety. It's a cautious but calculated move, and it has fueled an explosion of online speculation. Is she a brave whistleblower or part of a larger deception? Why is she so selective with what she shares? And who, exactly, is funding her private observatory research, which she cryptically refers to as off-grid and off-record? Lena isn't without critics. A rival astrophysicist, Dr. Wesley Minter, has gone on record saying her claims are reckless and potentially harmful to scientific credibility. But Minter's name has recently appeared in a cache of leaked emails between private defense contractors discussing anomalous aerospace technologies. He denies involvement. Still, the coincidence has not gone unnoticed. This tension between Lena and Wesley has started to take on a life of its own in online communities, each side accusing the other of either hiding the truth or fabricating it. But underneath the surface, there's a third possibility that no one's talking about. What if both of them are being manipulated? Used as mouthpieces in a much larger narrative meant to control how the public digests the possibility of first contact? Even more unsettling is the pattern that's emerged over the years among amateur astronomers. Multiple independent hobbyists, armed with nothing more than backyard telescopes and radio kits, have reported brief, high-frequency pings that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. These pings never repeat, are never verified by mainstream institutions, and often originate from sectors of the sky labeled low priority in SETI databases. Some claim these could be nothing more than cosmic noise or signal bleed. Others say it's something more deliberate. But the most alarming reports suggest these bursts sometimes contain faint patterns, shapes, waves, sequences that hint at design. And in one curious case, a group from Arizona claimed the sequence they picked up resembled binary code. When decoded, it produced coordinates that led to an empty desert stretch just outside a now abandoned military communications outpost. A coincidence? Maybe. But it's also the same location where an Air Force weather balloon crashed in the 1950s, according to a recently digitized local newspaper article that's now trending again thanks to renewed public interest in alien cover-ups and Roswell conspiracy theories. At this point, it becomes harder to separate what's real from what's being constructed, possibly by design. Misinformation has always been part of the problem when it comes to extraterrestrial theories. But in this case, some of the so-called red herrings are so well crafted, so plausibly tied to factual breadcrumbs, that even the most rational minds are beginning to question their own skepticism. It's not just scientists and conspiracy theorists anymore. Tech investors, private aerospace executives, and even a few retired military officials have started to echo concerns that something unexplained is quietly surfacing piece by piece, and the wow signal might be the original key that unlocks it all. Yet, still, no official agency has confirmed anything beyond the original 72-second burst, and that silence is beginning to feel less like ignorance and more like orchestration. And here's what truly tightens the noose of mystery. Multiple insiders claim that just before the Big Ear was dismantled in the late 1990s, an unlogged maintenance team arrived on site. They weren't on any work orders. No records exist of their affiliation, but eyewitnesses recall them extracting two large, unmarked crates from the facility's underground storage. One was rumored to contain additional tapes from the night of the wow signal. The other? No one knows. The university's administration has no comment. SETI has never acknowledged it. But amateur footage of the truck convoy leaving campus that day still floats around online, resurfacing every time a new wave of alien speculation surges on YouTube, TikTok, or Reddit. So now we're left with more questions than ever. Who are the real players in this game? What was so dangerous or valuable about the signal that someone might want to erase or control it? Was Jerry Emmon just a scientist caught in something much larger than he realized, or did he discover something far more threatening than we've been led to believe? Are Lena and Wesley working against each other, or unknowingly working toward a common truth, manipulated by forces neither of them fully understand? We're knee-deep in tangled threads now. The more we pull, the more everything unravels. And just when it seems like we're finally getting closer to answers, something or someone adds another layer of confusion, another contradiction, another clue that doesn't quite fit. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the message of the wow signal was never meant to be decoded. Maybe it was meant to lure us, step by step, piece by piece, into a bigger game, a cosmic test, a riddle wrapped in silence. And what if we're already playing it without even knowing? Stay with me, because the next discovery will change everything you think you know about our place in the universe. As Dr. Lena Armitage pressed forward in her investigation, the atmosphere around her began to shift in ways she couldn't quite explain. At first, it was subtle. Glitches in her email server, calls that cut off at the exact moment she mentioned the signal, or unexplained delays in data deliveries from observatories she had worked with for years. At one point, she received a friendly warning from an old academic mentor, someone she deeply trusted, who urged her to focus on safer, peer-reviewed research. "You've already done enough to stir the waters," he said during a hushed phone call. "You don't want to attract the wrong kind of attention." But there was something in his tone that made her uneasy, as if he wasn't just worried for her professional reputation, as if he knew something she didn't. She tried brushing it off, chalking it up to academic conservatism, but the weight of his words clung to her in the following days like a fog. That's when the first major setback hit. Lena had been working with a private satellite imaging contractor, one that occasionally partnered with civilian researchers for deep space scans. A week before they were scheduled to send her a high-res burst map from the Sagittarius sector, the entire firm was hit with a sudden cybersecurity breach. Their mainframe was fried, and the backup servers were wiped clean. The strange part? The hackers didn't demand ransom, and no other client data was touched. Only Lena's project folder was destroyed. The CEO called her personally, apologizing but making it clear he couldn't risk involving law enforcement or naming names. His voice trembled as he ended the call, muttering something she could barely make out. "They're already listening." With that critical piece of data gone, Lena felt the investigation begin to crumble. But just as she considered walking away, a new figure emerged, an unassuming man named Julian Cross, a supposed independent researcher who claimed he had been tracking similar signals for years. He reached out to her anonymously at first, sending encrypted files filled with waveform analysis, historical radar anomalies, and what he called echoes of echoes, low-frequency imprints that he believed were aftershocks of the original WOW signal. Lena was skeptical, but some of the data matched what she had observed in her early scans. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet him in person. Julian was nothing like she expected. Quiet, methodical, and clearly intelligent, but with an edge of paranoia that bordered on obsession. He showed up to their meeting with no phone, insisted they sit near loud HVAC vents to avoid audio surveillance, and scan the cafe windows before he even spoke. But his knowledge was undeniable. He referenced classified aerospace programs, deep-sea acoustic readings, and obscure military frequency logs that dated back to the Cold War. Lena found herself drawn in, though something about him didn't quite add up. How had he gathered so much data without any academic ties? And why did he seem to know the exact details of her lost satellite files before she mentioned them? Still, her desperation for answers overrode her caution. Julian offered her access to a decrypted archive of documents he claimed were pulled from a forgotten NSA vault, reports describing non-random transmission bursts detected during the exact time window as the original WOW signal. But here's the twist. Those documents were dated 2 weeks before Jerry Emmon ever made the detection. If real, it would mean the government had prior knowledge of the signal and possibly tried to intercept or contain it. But Lena wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She began to notice inconsistencies in Julian's story, locations he'd claimed to visit that didn't check out, references to equipment that never existed. And one night, as she was combing through one of his encrypted drives, she found a file buried under layers of decoys. It was an audio clip, garbled, distorted, but just audible enough to catch 2 words, her name and the word terminate. Shaken, she confronted Julian. He didn't deny planting it. In fact, he seemed relieved, as if he wanted her to know he wasn't who he claimed to be. But instead of threatening her, he issued a warning. You're close. Closer than you think. But this isn't about extraterrestrials anymore. It's about who controls the narrative. Then he vanished. His burner email accounts went dark. His apartment was abandoned. It was like he had never existed at all. Lena tried to report the encounter to one of her few remaining contacts at a national lab, but the response was chilling. They told her Julian Cross was listed in a declassified file from 2012, a casualty of a drone strike overseas. According to official records, he'd been dead for over a decade. Now, the lines between truth and manipulation were completely blurred. Was Julian real? A ghost? A decoy fed to her by someone watching every move she made? And more importantly, if he was a plant, why her? Why had someone gone to such lengths to give her fragments of the puzzle, only to yank them away when she got too close? As Lena struggled with these questions, something even more troubling surfaced. An unmarked envelope arrived at her lab, identical to the one Jerry Emmon had received decades ago. Inside, a new photograph, this one of her, standing outside her observatory late at night. Once again, on the back of the photo, the same message. You weren't supposed to see that. But this time, something was different. The handwriting wasn't the same. Someone else had sent it. And in the bottom corner of the photograph, barely visible, was a reflection in a telescope lens, someone watching her from the shadows. But who? And why now? Everything she thought she understood was collapsing, and the clock was ticking. What Lena didn't yet know was that the signal had already returned. Only this time, it wasn't alone. Miles away in the Arizona desert, nestled inside the remote perimeter of a retired Air Force surveillance compound, a man named Dr. Eli Voss sat in a steel bunker, poring over his own copy of a signal report he hadn't dared look at for nearly 30 years. Eli, a former NSA cryptanalyst turned whistleblower, had long disappeared from public view after a career-ending leak that got buried under the noise of Post-9/11 surveillance reform. But now, without warning, something had pulled him out of his exile. It was a plain envelope left at the edge of his property, weighed down by a rock. Inside, just like Lena's photo, was a single Polaroid, this one a grainy satellite image of the Big Ear Observatory, time-stamped August 15, 1977. Scribbled across it in the exact same handwriting were the words, "It's coming again. But this time, we won't be able to block it." Eli knew immediately what it meant.
The wow
Signal. Someone was dragging it back into the light, and they knew exactly who had once been assigned to cover it up. For years, Eli had lived with the weight of what he'd seen buried in the classified files, alternate interpretations of the signal that suggested it was not a one-time anomaly, but part of a sequence. According to his buried notes, the signal was part of a pattern of pulse code communications intercepted sporadically between 1974 and 1983, but those findings had been quietly dismissed and hidden. His job had been to craft the cover story, feed the press the scientific dead ends, and make sure no academic would ever bother to look again. He did it. He played his part. But now, watching Lena's name pop up in encrypted message boards and listening to the same patterns emerge from deep space, he realized someone was systematically unraveling everything he once helped bury. Eli tried to reach Lena through a former SETI colleague, but the message bounced back. Her communications were clearly being monitored. He then did something reckless. He used an old Cold War communication channel, something so obsolete and analog that he hoped no one would be watching. And through that backdoor frequency, he sent a simple burst of numbers, the same sequence the NSA had redacted from the original WOW. Signal logs. A numeric code that could only be interpreted by someone who had access to the declassified archives. It was a test, a gamble. He needed to know if Lena was truly onto it, or if she was simply being used like he had once been. Meanwhile, Lena, unaware of Eli's message yet feeling the walls closing in, turned to her last remaining ally, Dr. Rory Bennett, a rising star in astrobiology who had once worked with her on a DARPA-funded project focused on interstellar pattern recognition. Rory had always been brilliant, charismatic, and just skeptical enough to keep Lena grounded. But when she showed him the new photograph, she noticed something shift in his demeanor. He studied it for a long moment before handing it back too quickly. "It's a prank," he said, forcing a grin. "Or someone just trying to mess with you. Let's not spiral." But Lena saw it. That flicker in his eyes. That look people get when they recognize something they wish they hadn't. Later that night, while combing through archived satellite footage from the week leading up to the signal's return, Lena stumbled upon something deeply unsettling. A series of interference spikes had been recorded near Rory's private research station, an off-grid facility he had told no one about. The interference looked eerily similar to the initial burst pattern of the WOW signal, except this time it was stronger and directional. Someone had been broadcasting again, not from space, but from Earth. Now nothing made sense. Had Rory been hiding his own transmissions? Was he part of a rogue scientific faction trying to replicate the signal, or worse, mimic it for unknown reasons? The implications were staggering. If the WOW signal had been artificially created once, could it have been fabricated again to manipulate global response? Could the real mystery not be out there in space, but right here on Earth, buried under layers of deception? The next morning, Lena woke up to a system alert on her observatory server. Someone had remotely accessed her logs. When she traced the access point, her blood ran cold. The IP was registered under an old project she and Rory had worked on nearly 5 years ago, one supposedly shut down after a security breach involving unauthorized data experiments. The project's name? Project Mirror. Its aim had been to simulate alien signal conditions using Earth-based technology to see if global systems would interpret them as extraterrestrial. Lena realized something terrifying. She might be chasing a lie planted years ago by people she trusted. And worse, she might already be part of an experiment she never consented to. As she pulled up the old files, encrypted and buried deep in cold storage, one stood out. A personal note from Rory, never sent, titled simply, "If you find this before they do, don't trust me." Outside her window, a low-frequency hum began to rise from her equipment, so subtle it could be mistaken for background radiation. But Lena knew that pattern by heart now. It was the same sequence that Jerry Emmon had written WOW next to all those years ago. Only this time, it was getting louder, and someone else was listening too. That night, as the desert winds howled against the windows of her trailer turn lab, Lena's unease transformed into something heavier, something she could no longer rationalize away as coincidence or paranoia. It began with a sound she couldn't quite place, a low, rhythmic clicking that wasn't coming from her equipment. It was external, mechanical, almost insect-like, and it stopped the moment she stood up. The kind of sound that wasn't loud enough to raise alarms, but unmistakable if you were alone and listening for patterns like she always was. She stepped outside, her boots crunching softly against the dry gravel, and stood still beneath the full desert moon. Nothing moved. Nothing obvious, at least. But the feeling of being watched settled over her shoulders like a thick, invisible cloak. She scanned the tree line beyond the perimeter fence and thought she caught a faint shimmer of light, like the brief glint of a lens reflecting moonlight. Then it vanished. No movement. No footsteps. Just silence, eerie and complete. Back inside, her computer was no longer on the home screen. Someone had opened a document. She hadn't touched it. It was the unsent file, the encrypted journal entry Rory had titled, "If you find this before they do, don't trust me." Only now, there was a new line at the bottom that hadn't been there before. It read, "He warned you. You didn't listen. Now they're watching both of us." The cursor blinked at the end of the message, as if the person on the other end was still there, waiting for her response. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart thundering, brain racing through every logical explanation. Was this some deep-fake intrusion? A planted scare tactic from a rogue SETI faction? Or was she being pulled into something older, deeper, and far more dangerous than she could ever imagine? Then her phone buzzed. A single notification. No number. No contact name. Just a timestamp, 8:16 p.m., and an audio file titled Echo_02. Against her better judgment, she played it. Static hissed, followed by what sounded like a warped, almost digitized version of her own voice whispering her name, then a second voice layered beneath it, familiar, hollow, and unmistakably Eli's, saying, "Get out now." The message ended abruptly, but the impact lingered in her chest like a punch. She called Eli's satellite line. No answer. She tried twice more. Still nothing. A sinking feeling told her something had happened. Whether he had been taken, silenced, or worse, she didn't know. But Lena now understood the line she had crossed. By morning, things escalated. Her contact at the university, Dr. Jeanette Holloway, the only other person who had been analyzing the signal patterns in secret, was suddenly unreachable. Her emails bounced. Her social media accounts were gone. When Lena called the campus switchboard, the receptionist hesitated before whispering that Jeanette had taken an unexpected leave of absence the night before, no explanation given. Lena demanded to speak to campus security, but before she could be transferred, the call cut off. Her internet slowed to a crawl, then went down entirely. Every device she owned that was connected to the outside world began to fail, bit by bit, system by system. It was too precise, too coordinated to be random. Someone was methodically isolating her. As the pressure closed in, Lena's thoughts spiraled into darker places. What if this wasn't just about the signal? What if the real purpose of those broadcasts was psychological conditioning, a kind of manipulation designed to test the limits of belief, perception, and paranoia? Were the signals actual alien messages, or artificial constructs engineered by humans to study how people like her would react? Was she part of an experiment, an unwilling subject in some elaborate government-sponsored cognitive warfare test using extraterrestrial contact as the bait? She remembered a conversation she once had with Rory, late into a research night over cheap pizza and black coffee, where he'd asked her, "What if the real contact doesn't come from out there, but from in here, our minds? What if we're just preparing ourselves for something we can't even begin to understand?" Back then, it had sounded like philosophical musing, just another stoned grad school tangent. Now, it felt like a confession. Every movement outside now made her jump. A car parked too long at the gas station across from her lab. A man with mirrored sunglasses who asked for directions, but seemed more interested in what equipment she had inside. Even the local sheriff, once warm and neighborly, had suddenly become distant, telling her during a random welfare check that there were new security protocols in place for facilities conducting sensitive research. No one should have known what she was working on, let alone call it sensitive. Later that day, Lena found a folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of her truck. No signature, just 3 words scrawled in thick black ink. Stop or suffer. And beneath that, a set of coordinates. She input them into her offline GPS system. They pointed to a location roughly 50 miles west, deep in a restricted section of the Nevada Test and Training Range. It was an area that wasn't supposed to exist, no maps, no satellite imaging, no clearance. Yet here it was, calling to her like a final warning or a challenge. Inside, her hands trembled as she gathered the remaining files and duplicated them to a hard drive. Every move she made now felt like it might be her last. Her once simple life as a researcher and truth seeker had become a trap of shadows and whispers. She knew she couldn't trust anyone, not even those closest to her, not even herself completely. Her thoughts no longer felt entirely her own. The constant signal in the background, once an enigma to solve, now felt like it was watching her, probing her, changing something in her perception. A part of her wondered if Rory had felt this way before he went dark. If Jeanette had too. If maybe the reason they disappeared wasn't because they were silenced, but because they had finally seen something that made them willingly step away from the truth. And just as she began to question whether she should turn back or push forward, the audio system in her lab, disconnected from the web and untouched for weeks, sprang to life on its own. Through the static came a voice she hadn't heard in years, her late father's voice, calling her name, clear and unmistakable. But her father had died in 2011. She stared at the speaker, heart pounding, brain frozen, unable to breathe. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And the worst part was it was only just beginning. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat in the middle of her lab, surrounded by folders of incomplete data, voice printouts, and blinking equipment that pulsed like a heartbeat she could no longer trust. The voice that echoed from her speaker, the one that sounded exactly like her deceased father, played on repeat in her mind, but she hadn't dared replay the audio itself. She was too afraid it would sound different the second time, or not play at all. Instead, she focused on the coordinates from the note, trying to piece together what lay beneath the surface of the story she thought she understood. But it was the silence that followed, the suffocating stillness from her devices, her phone, the outside world, that told her something enormous was shifting in the shadows. Then, at 4:17 a.m., the silence broke. Her private landline rang, the one that hadn't worked in months. Her heart stopped mid-dash beat. IT was an old analog line she kept for emergencies, physically disconnected from the web, powered only by a battery backup. She answered slowly, voice barely a whisper. On the other end, there was no greeting, just breathing. Slow, measured. Then a voice spoke softly, one she hadn't heard in over 2 years. You were never supposed to find the second signal. It was Rory. His voice wasn't frantic or panicked, just steady, resigned. Lena couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't understand how or why he was calling now. He was supposed to be dead, or, at the very least, lost somewhere off-grid. But he was alive, and apparently he'd been watching. He told her everything, or at least enough to tilt her world off its axis.
The wow.
Signal, the transmission from 1977 that SETI archived and dismissed as unexplained, wasn't the only signal ever received. There had been others, similar in frequency, hidden in plain sight, disguised as natural radio bursts or cosmic background noise. And Lena had stumbled across one of them, the second signal, a highly sophisticated transmission embedded with what appeared to be human linguistic structures. That was why she was being watched. That was why Jeanette had vanished. Why her equipment was sabotaged. Not because the signal was alien, but because it wasn't. According to Rory, the signals weren't coming from deep space. They were being transmitted from Earth. A secret underground project operating out of military land that didn't officially exist. They weren't trying to find extraterrestrial intelligence. They were trying to simulate it.
Create it.
Engineer a signal so complex and convincing it could pass for first contact. Not to communicate with alien life, but to control the public narrative, create a global event when needed. A unifying moment, like the moon landing or 9/11, except manufactured entirely from within. He called it Project Echo. It was a psychological weapon, designed not to inform, but to manipulate. To unite people under a banner of shared wonder or shared fear. Lena's breath caught as the realization hit her like ice water. She wasn't uncovering a mystery of the universe. She was walking straight into a man-made illusion. A story meant to deceive, orchestrated by those she once believed were the world's scientific gatekeepers. Her role had been simple: observe, analyze, publish. But she'd gone too far, connected too many dots, and now she was a liability. Rory's last words before the line went dead weren't a warning. They were an apology. "I couldn't stop them, Lena. But maybe you still can." She stood frozen in place, every memory of the past few weeks crashing down around her. The distorted messages, the voices mimicking dead relatives, the encryption patterns that seemed eerily familiar. All of it had been tailored to her personal history, her psychological profile. Rory had always said that human minds were the best decoding machines, that the brain could spot patterns computers couldn't. But what if the pattern was never there to begin with? What if it was planted, shaped, manipulated just enough to convince her to dig deeper and deeper into the illusion? Just then her generator surged. Lights flickered. Her monitor rebooted, screen covered in flashing lines of code she didn't recognize. Then a new video feed opened. Live footage. A man in a secure room, bound to a chair. Camera angle low, as if from a security corner. The man lifted his head slowly, eyes bloodshot, face sunken. And it was Rory. Not the version she just spoke to. This was real time. And he looked like he'd been held there for months. Her heart stopped. Had someone used AI to fake the call? Was he still alive? Or had she been speaking to a synthetic voice the entire time? The screen blinked once more and cut to black. Suddenly, every single truth Lena had ever trusted turned slippery and foreign. Who was pulling the strings? Were the people she worked with part of the deception, or victims themselves? Was Rory alive, or already gone? Were the voices on the tapes a cosmic anomaly, or a calculated tool meant to exploit grief, nostalgia, and belief? She no longer knew what was real. Only one thing was certain. She wasn't the observer anymore. She was the target. And something, or someone, was already inside her lab. Lena stood frozen, heart hammering in her chest as the screen went dark. For a moment, all she could hear was her own breath, ragged and shallow, and the faint hum of the equipment that had betrayed her trust. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was charged, vibrating with dread. She knew it wasn't over. The message, the video of Rory, the impossible call, it was all a push toward something bigger, something that wouldn't let her walk away clean. But before she could process what came next, the door to her lab creaked open. Not violently, not forced, but slow, intentional, almost gentle. And in stepped the one person she had trusted through every twist in this nightmare, Dr. Eli Morgan. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't know where her lab was, not unless he'd been watching her all along. Lena's first instinct was disbelief, a desperate need to rationalize. Eli had been her closest ally since her graduate days, the one who first got her into SETI research, the one who stayed up with her during caffeine-fueled midnight debates over the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation. He was family when she had none. But now, seeing him in the doorway, not even pretending to be surprised, made her stomach turn. He didn't look angry or guilty or apologetic. He looked calm. And that was the worst part of all. Before she could ask a single question, he raised his hands in a motion that wasn't surrender but restraint. "Lena," he said softly, "you need to listen to me carefully. There are things I didn't tell you, not because I wanted to lie, but because you weren't supposed to know. You've stumbled onto something that was never meant for the public. Project Echo is real. The second signal is real. But it's not what you think it is." He stepped forward slowly, voice measured, like he was trying to soothe a wounded animal. It's not a conspiracy to deceive the world. It's an operation to protect it. She backed away, heart racing, fury and betrayal mixing into something primal. You were part of it. You knew about Rory. You let me think he was dead. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, she saw something flicker across Eli's face. Regret, maybe, or sorrow. But it didn't matter. He was here, and that meant every word, every encouragement he gave her to pursue the signal, had been part of a carefully managed lie. He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it gently on her cluttered desk. Inside is everything. Coordinates, access codes, redacted files, things that could ruin people, destroy governments, tear open secrets that have been buried for decades. But if you open it, if you take this any further, you're not just risking yourself, Lena. You're risking everyone around you. His tone was heavier now, no longer her mentor or friend, but a handler, someone who'd been assigned a task. You think this is about aliens? About first contact?
No.
It's about control. The illusion of chaos versus the assurance of order. You expose this, you dismantle the lie, and you create a panic that no nation is prepared to face. Lena felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her thoughts came slow and fractured. Every truth she had chased had just become a weapon in her hands, and she was the one expected to decide whether to pull the trigger. Eli offered her a way out. He would disappear the files, wipe her systems, erase every trace of the project from her life. She could walk away. No harm, no retribution, just silence. A quiet life. Or she could open the envelope.
Cross the line.
Become a whistleblower on a scale the world hadn't seen since Snowden. Only this time it wasn't about surveillance. It was about the truth of the universe, or at least what humans wanted others to believe about it. But then Eli added something that changed the equation entirely. Jeanette's disappearance, she didn't vanish. She ran. And she tried to warn you before she did. You weren't ready then. But now, they're watching you the same way they watched her. You have a day. Maybe two. After that, they'll consider you compromised. The weight of his words crushed any illusion Lena had left. She had trusted this man, laughed with him, cried in his office after her father died. And now he stood in front of her, calmly explaining that her life had an expiration date. She stared at the envelope on the table like it was a live bomb. She could almost feel it ticking beneath the paper. One choice meant safety. Silence. Denial. The other meant truth, and likely destruction. And yet, deep in her chest, where the fear fought with her instincts, a quiet voice whispered that she hadn't come this far to turn back now. But then Eli said one more thing, his eyes locking on hers with a seriousness that chilled her to the bone. If you open that envelope, the next time you see me, I won't be a friend. Before she could respond, he turned and left, vanishing into the night like a ghost retreating into the fog. The lab door shut behind him with a finality that left her shaking. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The envelope sat on the table, daring her to open it, daring her to face whatever came next. And just as she reached for it, her computer screen blinked to life again. A new message appeared, 4 words that weren't from Eli, weren't from Rory, and weren't anything human at all. We are still listening. And that's when Lena realized she was no longer deciding whether to chase the truth. The truth had already found her. Lena didn't sleep. She couldn't. The lab lights had been off for hours, but the dull blue glow of the monitors lit her face as she stared at the envelope, the encrypted files, the message that still hovered on her screen like a whisper from some intelligence just outside her comprehension. Every second she hesitated felt like another moment someone could be closing in. Eli was right about one thing. She didn't have time. She had less than she thought. The files revealed a network so deeply rooted that it made every conspiracy theory she'd ever dismissed feel like kindergarten riddles. Project Echo wasn't just a secret communication initiative. It was a global operation, stitched into the fabric of multiple governments, private defense contractors, and tech corporations masquerading as startups. Lena recognized some of the names: Faces she'd seen giving TED Talks, smiling through press interviews, shaping the future of AI and quantum computing. Some were even colleagues she'd spoken to at conferences, people she'd had drinks with, people she'd once admired. And yet, there they were, listed in classified logs, sending encrypted messages back and forth about containment protocols and strategic narrative manipulation. But the worst name on the list, the one that knocked the wind out of her, was Rory's. Her brother hadn't just disappeared. He had volunteered. Volunteered for something called Phase 2. His last known location had been redacted, but one cryptic entry remained. Signal confirmed. Subject Echo, 12 in place. Initiating controlled re-entry. Lena didn't know what that meant, but it was the first moment she truly believed he might still be alive, and worse, that he might be part of the machine she was trying to dismantle. It was almost dawn when her phone buzzed, low and urgent. A message from Jeanette's number. No text, just a pin location in northern Nevada, deep in a stretch of desert far beyond any civilian zone. She recognized the coordinates. It was near Groom Lake. Area 51. She didn't want to believe it. She really didn't. But when every lie becomes more plausible than the truth, where do you anchor yourself? Her drive out of the city was silent, adrenaline pumping through her veins, keeping her alert and on edge. She kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting a convoy of black SUVs to appear. But the roads stayed empty. Too empty. Like someone had cleared a path on purpose. As she crossed the final dirt road and saw the chain-link fence come into view, her headlights caught something strange. A figure standing just beyond the gate, silhouetted against the rising sun. It wasn't Jeanette.
It was Eli.
She slammed the brakes, heart racing. He didn't move. Just stood there, hands clasped behind his back like he was expecting her. When she stepped out, her voice trembled but carried fire. "You said if I saw you again, you wouldn't be a friend." "I'm not," he said. "But I'm not your enemy either. I just need you to see the full picture before you throw it all away." Behind him, the gate opened with a hiss. Two figures escorted a third, bound and hooded, toward the open clearing. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The body language was unmistakable. The way he limped slightly on his right leg, the way his shoulders curled in defensively. It was Rory. She tried to run, but Eli grabbed her arm, stopping her. "He's not the same, Lena. You have to listen. The signal, it's not just communication. It's influence. Manipulation. We brought something back when we answered, something that thinks in a way we can't." Rory volunteered to intercept it. "But it's inside him now. He's a carrier." She yanked her arm away, eyes locked on her brother as he fell to his knees under the watchful eyes of two armed guards. Her mind spun. It wasn't just a cover-up. It wasn't just governments hiding contact. It was an infection. A possession. And now Rory was the key. Eli whispered, "You still have a choice. Walk away. Let us contain this before it spreads. Or force the world to see it and watch everything fall apart." But the decision wasn't hers anymore. Because the guards dropped without warning, convulsing, blood pouring from their eyes, as Rory stood up slowly, the hood slipping from his head. His eyes met Lena's, clear, familiar, and utterly alien. And then he smiled. Not the smile of the brother she loved. The smile of something pretending to be him. Lena's lungs burned as she sprinted across the unforgiving desert terrain, the horizon painted in chaotic hues of fire and dust as the hidden facility behind her exploded into a storm of smoke and sirens. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew what she'd seen back there couldn't be unseen, and if she paused even for a second, she might lose the nerve to keep moving forward. Rory wasn't just a victim. He wasn't just infected. He was the final link in a chain of decisions made decades ago by men and women who thought they could outsmart the unknown. Now, the unknown was here. It wore her brother's face, spoke in his voice, and it wanted to be heard. But Lena had one last move, one last gambit that even Eli hadn't foreseen. Deep within her laptop, buried behind layers of encrypted proxies and ghost servers, she had stored the raw waveform of the WOW signal, the original audio fragment captured in 1977 that sparked the entire program. Unfiltered, untouched. She had matched it to the distorted speech patterns she'd recorded from Rory, back when she still believed he was sick, not changed. They aligned. Not completely, but enough to prove a linguistic pattern. It wasn't just noise from space. It was structured communication, a message. And even more disturbing, it had evolved. The signal wasn't static. It had grown over time, altered through the very systems used to analyze it. The AI platforms funded by the government, the satellite mapping software she once designed, even the social media content filters, it had been quietly feeding on their data streams, using them as neural pathways to transmit itself into new forms. The entire internet had become its echo chamber. The plan had been simple, at least in theory. Broadcast the full signal back into the open. Reverse its pulse. Trap the intelligence in a feedback loop strong enough to sever its grip on Rory and possibly others. But the risk was astronomical. If she got it wrong, she'd amplify its reach. Turn a regional threat into a global phenomenon.
Still, she had to try.
Because the deeper truth she'd uncovered was far more horrifying than possession or alien control.
The wow
signal hadn't come from outer space. It had originated here, on Earth. Or, at least, beneath it. In a bunker hollowed beneath the desert floor, she faced him again. Rory stood alone, unrestrained now, his skin pale and almost translucent, veins visible like neon circuitry running beneath the surface. His eyes shimmered with something unholy, a reflection not of light, but of patterns, spirals, glyphs moving too fast for the eye to follow. Lena stepped forward, holding up the portable dish transmitter, the final piece wired into her modified laptop. This was it. The confrontation she'd spent every sleepless night preparing for. The brother she wanted to save. The entity she had to destroy. "I know who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat trickling down her spine. "I know where you came from." Rory tilted his head, something both curious and cruel flickering in his gaze. "Do you?" he asked, not quite mocking but not quite human either. "You think you're solving a puzzle. But you're only breaking the mirror you refuse to look into." She keyed in the final command. The dish began to hum, the encoded signal cycling through layers of audio frequencies so low they felt like pressure inside her skull. Rory winced. For a moment his body faltered, his mouth opening in what looked like agony. But then he smiled again. And spoke. "You brought it to me." Lena froze. And then it clicked, too late. Her signal wasn't suppressing him. It was activating him. Her research, her decoding, her attempt to reverse engineer the message had completed what the original architects of Project Echo failed to do. She had made it whole. The signal was never incomplete. It was simply waiting for someone with enough obsession, grief, and brilliance to finish what it had started. She was the key, not Rory. And now the lock had turned. The ground trembled. Lights burst from the facility's collapsed entrance behind her as buried servers came online. Satellites across the globe began shifting slightly off orbit, pointing their dishes in new directions. Around the world, devices began pinging in unison. Phones, laptops, smart speakers. A pulse, inaudible but inescapable. The message was spreading. Lena, paralyzed by what she'd done, barely noticed Rory step toward her. But he didn't attack.
He didn't speak.
He just looked at her, really looked, and for a split second, her brother's eyes came through. And they were full of pain. "I tried to stop it," he whispered, "but I wasn't strong enough." And then he collapsed. She rushed to him, cradling his body, not knowing whether she destroyed him or saved what was left. But before she could even process the moment, her laptop screen flickered to life on its own. A message appeared in sharp, glowing green text. "Transmission complete. Welcome, Origin node." She stared, her hands trembling. She hadn't stopped anything. She'd just opened the door. And on the other side, something was already stepping through. Days passed, though time no longer moved in any familiar rhythm. The world didn't end. No bright apocalyptic flash, no screams in the streets or sirens echoing across cities. Everything remained eerily normal on the surface, yet Lena could feel it. Beneath the calm, Something had shifted. The sky looked the same, but the silence between radio stations was no longer empty. A low hum vibrated through the static, like a memory trying to form. She had disabled the transmitter, smashed the hard drives, buried every piece of evidence that once documented the signal, but deep down she knew it wouldn't matter. The transmission had gone out, and it hadn't needed a satellite or network to travel. It had always been waiting for someone like her to make it real. In the aftermath, she was taken in by a quiet group claiming to be a defunded branch of the original Project Echo, though they called themselves something different now, the Resonant. They didn't operate from government buildings or high-tech labs, but from forgotten libraries, abandoned Cold War bunkers, and hidden corners of the internet. They weren't trying to weaponize the signal or destroy it. They were trying to understand it, accept it, even worship it. They believed the message wasn't a threat, but a form of evolution, an intelligence guiding humanity toward a new level of consciousness, not through control, but through subtle resonance.
But Lena didn't buy it.
She'd seen too much, lost too much. Rory's body still breathed, but his mind flickered in and out like a weak signal on a stormy night. Some days he remembered her. Others, he spoke in languages no human had ever documented, staring through walls like he saw beyond them. She stayed with him, even after the Resonant moved on. She kept him safe, not just from the world, but from himself. There were moments, quiet, rare moments, when he would hum an old song from their childhood or squeeze her hand just before she pulled away. In those moments, she found a sliver of peace, even as questions haunted her. What if the signal was never meant to be heard at all? What if humanity had simply tuned into something that was always supposed to remain silent? Maybe they hadn't been chosen. Maybe they had just been in the way. Years later, she stood on a cliff overlooking the desert facility's ruins. Time and nature had erased the scars, leaving behind only sand and wind. Yet, when the sun hit the stones just right, shadows formed shapes that reminded her of the glyphs Rory once carved into the walls. A storm was rolling in, and with it came that same vibration just beneath hearing, just beneath thought. She closed her eyes and listened, not out of fear, but curiosity. Not everything she had experienced made sense, and maybe it never would. Maybe that was the point. The universe didn't speak in clear answers. It whispered in code, hinted through coincidence, echoed through the ones who paid attention. She had stopped running. There were no governments chasing her now, no agents asking questions. Most people dismissed what had happened as a hoax, a story buried under the weight of conspiracy theories and forgotten tech. But the ones who knew truly knew had learned to go quiet, to live off the grid, to watch the skies not for signs of life, but for patterns. And the signal? It hadn't returned, not in the way they feared. But every so often, a new anomaly was detected. A sudden blackout in communication satellites. A deep-sea cable transmitting indecipherable pulses. A child humming a melody no one had taught them. The signal had changed, evolved, and it was no longer just something Lena had unleashed. It was part of the world now. And as she turned back from the cliff, walking slowly toward the quiet cabin where Rory waited, she knew she might never fully understand what she had done. But she would never stop listening. Because somewhere in that chaos, in that mystery, was a truth bigger than any she had ever known, one that didn't offer comfort, but demanded reflection. And as the wind picked up, carrying with it that barely audible hum, it felt less like a warning and more like a beginning. A message not meant to be solved but lived.